Hi, I'm Joannis, and today I wanted to talk about integration and segregation. Based on one of my videos titled White Gatekeeping Must Stop, I got a question that really made me pause and think. The question was, why should we continue to try to integrate? Why not try to create non-toxic spaces? That's a great and thought-provoking question. So because I always like to receive a simple answer first before explanation, the simple answer for me is yes. We should continue to strive for integration in spaces and cultures that reflect the diversity of our world. But let me break that down into 4 parts. Timeout. Before I get into those 4 points, I have something very important to say. While some suggest we should just let them be to create our own spaces and leave exclusionary ones alone, I strongly disagree. That approach, while sometimes coming from a place of self-preservation or weariness, can inadvertently sustain the very inequities we're trying to dismantle. Injustice doesn't fix itself. It requires action, confrontation, and yes, relentless advocacy. Enough is enough. There must be accountability. We need real laws, policies, and structural reform to prevent ongoing exclusion, ensure equity, and that it never happens again. I've witnessed firsthand how relentlessly some white individuals fight for what they believe they're entitled to, and even when they are wrong. We've seen it throughout history, and we still see it today in everyday actions. Like the effort some will put into getting speed bumps, sidewalks, and speed traps installed in their neighborhoods. We've even seen that persistence when they're clearly in the wrong, like when a Karen or a Ken feels entitled enough to question or police the presence of a Black resident in a neighborhood. It's blatantly unjust, yet they fight with everything they've got to get their way. That same energy and determination must be applied to fighting injustice and demanding systemic change collectively from all of us committed to anti-racism, regardless of race or ethnicity. We must be just as relentless in demanding real, lasting change. And look, there's no denying that Black and brown individuals often navigate systems intentionally designed to hinder their progress or deny them access altogether. But this reality is not a reason to shrink back. On the contrary, it is a call to stand taller. For those who have been marginalized, it is time to hold your head high and unapologetically claim the equity you are entitled to. While some forms of privilege are systemic and measurable, others live in the mind. They manifest in posture, presence, and the quiet or loud assertion of worth. And let me be clear, I personally refuse to accept that only certain people are allowed to move through the world with unearned confidence. If someone feels entitled to project their privilege, I will not hesitate to project mine. I, too, take up space. I, too, have the right to look someone in the eye and ask, "How dare you?" especially when faced with disrespect, dismissal, or injustice. And let's not pretend history isn't relevant. After generations of white violence, past and current lynchings, white terrorism, continued racial violence and aggression, I reserve the right to be not only cautious, but entitled to suspicion, to claim my own sense of protective privilege, even if it flips the usual narrative. Because equity doesn't just mean access, it means agency. And in reference to the part about also creating our own space, a key example is beachfront property across the US, and honestly, even outside of the US. Land is power, and white ownership dominates these spaces almost entirely. Access to desirable spaces like coastal real estate was not just accidentally kept out of reach for non-white people, it was intentionally restricted through redlining, discriminatory zoning laws, exclusionary covenants, and generational wealth theft. These policies were designed to hoard opportunity and access for white Americans, and they've been wildly effective. That's systemic exclusion in action. even the idea of creating our own beachfront spaces is not viable. You cannot just manufacture new shoreline. We cannot create more beachfront property. It's a finite resource. And the fact that it's almost exclusively controlled by a single demographic isn't just a quirk of capitalism, it's the result of settler colonialism, systemic racism, and intentional exclusion. First part, the illusion of safety and segregation. I've given this a lot of thought, especially when I hear about groups like in Arkansas attempting to build segregated racist communities. And if you haven't heard that, please Google it. It is happening right now. On one hand, part of me thinks, fine, segregate yourselves, remove your hatred from the general population. While it can feel like they are isolating their toxicity, which seems like a relief, or might even feel like they're doing us a favor by removing their toxicity, ultimately, I'm not for segregation, and I'm also not an enabler. The thing is, allowing hate-based groups to isolate only allows them to grow unchecked. And you see, the thing is, hate flourishes in the dark. Left alone, these spaces can indoctrinate, radicalize. If their aim is to build numbers and raise a generation shaped by bigotry, that's not just wrong, it's a threat, and it's dangerous. Segregation then becomes an incubator for extremism, and we've seen where that road can lead throughout history. I actually believe there should be laws banning racism entirely. No matter the form, that should be dealt with seriously. We should never allow racism to be contained, accommodated, or ignored. I think it must be confronted. Hate speech, racial violence, and systemic discrimination should face real consequences. We need more than just social disapproval. We need legal protections and systemic accountability. Listen, either people learn and grow beyond hate, or there are real consequences, period. Okay, so the second part. Toxicity is not exclusive to only one group. When we talk about creating non-toxic spaces, we have to acknowledge that toxicity exists everywhere. Segregation won't solve that. When considering integration, especially given the diversity of today's population, it becomes clear that segregation isn't just impractical, it's impossible. Our society has become deeply intertwined. We see multiculturalism everywhere, biracial individuals, intercultural families, and blended communities. We are far too connected to simply separate ourselves now. And as someone of mixed heritage, I've experienced exclusion and prejudice not just in white spaces, but even with predominantly Black spaces. I've been mocked, belittled, and made to feel like I didn't belong. And I'm aware that I'm not alone in these experiences. Other mixed-race individuals, or Latinos for instance, have shared similar stories. The roots of this toxicity aren't just about white supremacy directly, but also about the deep internalized effects it has left behind globally and with all races and ethnicities. Then you have issues like colorism, hair texturism, internalized racism, misplaced envy and pain. The aftershocks are everywhere. These wounds show up as bullying, exclusion, passive-aggressive remarks, and resentment toward perceived and actual privilege, especially when that privilege is tied to appearance. I'll never forget when my younger sister was jumped in her first year of high school. One of the attackers later admitted it was because she was light-skinned, pretty, and quote-unquote good hair, and she got all the attention from the guys. Those were her very words. The root wasn't personal, it was pain, insecurity, and social messaging from systemic racism that shaped that young girl's worldview. The dynamic of light versus dark within Black communities introduces real and often unspoken tensions. For some lighter-skinned, biracial, or multiracial individuals, being in predominantly Black spaces can evoke discomfort. They may question whether they are, quote-unquote, Black enough, worry about being perceived as outsiders, or feel excluded due to their proximity to whiteness, whether in skin tone, cultural experience, or upbringing. On the other side, some darker-skinned individuals knowingly or unknowingly may hold biases rooted in the historical realities of colorism, colonialism, and favoritism toward lighter skin. These biases can show up as resentment, distrust, or assumptions about privilege and authenticity. What should be a safe and affirming space for all Black and brown people festers with tension and judgment. These dynamics create emotional strain and division within spaces that should be affirming. These tensions are not just personal, but systemic, stemming from a legacy of white supremacy that rewarded lightness and devalued dark skin. They reflect generations of division sown by white supremacy, where proximity to whiteness was rewarded and darker skin was criminalized, marginalized, or invisibilized. Another example would be an instance when I wore my natural hair brushed into a fro in an all-Black space. I was the only girl in that space wearing my hair naturally, and it created a quiet but unmistakable tension. In a space where I expected solidarity, I felt like a target. It was as if my presence, or more specifically, my choice to show up fully as myself, triggered projections of unhealed pain, and that's not what I came there for. Some complimented me, and others gave me a sort of side-eye, passive comments, or a sort of disdain. And while this space had nothing to do with hair, one girl shared a compliment, and others kind of gave a side-eye and made passive remarks that one hair type is better than another. I think everybody has good hair. It's just how you choose to feel about your hair. But I do understand where this idea comes from. Then this guy in the group commented that he preferred natural hair. I rolled my eyes knowing that this would only make things worse for everyone. Sure enough, his vocalizing that opinion intensified the hostility in the room, not only towards him, but towards me. It gave some a greater reason to exclude and feel bothered by me, because now it got the attention of this guy, which led him to use me or this opportunity to put them down, but at my expense. This only resulted in making my presence feel uncomfortable. I thought to myself, it's sad that the girls gave me mean girl energy and dismissed me. The subtle and deliberate ignoring, excluding, intentionally not giving me any eye contact, as if I'm not even in the room. It was clear they drew negative conclusions about me based on my appearance. I also thought, if only they knew what kind of person I am. I've always had their back, even in rooms where they are not present. I've always spoken up for justice, especially for darker-skinned individuals, girls, and their right to exist fully, proudly, and safely in their skin and hair. While such disappointing moments will not change my commitment to justice, equity, or sisterhood, when I'm treated like I'm just another privileged light-skinned girl, it's frustrating. I get where it comes from, and honestly, I have seen that stereotype. I've encountered girls who fit it exactly, dismissive, elitist, and insensitive toward darker-skinned women, but I've never aligned myself with them. In fact, I've intentionally distanced myself from those kind of people, as we do not get along. So when I'm met with judgment in spaces that claim to be safe, it's disheartening. These are not isolated incidents. They are a reflection of deep, complex, and often unspoken pain. And now the third part. Segregation does not necessarily heal. Some may believe that if we just separate ourselves, the pain will stop. But you cannot heal what you are unwilling to confront. Segregated spaces may feel safe temporarily, but they do not address the root, our collective wounds, traumas, and biases. Whether it's a white person with internalized superiority or a black person with internalized self-hatred, both are symptoms of the same white supremacy and systemic racism disease. And unless we engage in intentional integration where education, empathy, and exposure are prioritized, these cycles will continue. Segregation doesn't challenge people to grow. It doesn't create understanding. It doesn't push us to reflect or unlearn toxic beliefs. In fact, it allows bitterness, envy, and hate to fester quietly. The complexity can go even deeper. Racism, as well as anti-racism, exists within every race and ethnicity. You have people who passively do nothing against racism in every race, while others take an active anti-racist stance. So there is a clash even in the fight against racism. And that dynamic alone creates toxic environments that just cannot be simplified into black and white or us versus them. And finally, the fourth part. I think the path forward lies in diverse and accountable healing spaces. I understand the value of affinity spaces, temporary sanctuaries where people of shared identities can find comfort and process. Those spaces can definitely be a part of healing, but I don't consider them to be the destination. I feel that long-term healing requires integrated spaces built on respect, not tokenism, open dialogue and real listening, unlearning and re-educating, accountability, not just comfort, mental health awareness, intentional healing, and inner work in all communities. This isn't about forced unity or erasing identity. It's about building the courage to live among differences and still choose love, growth, and empathy. I know that segregation may feel like a solution, but to me it's really just an avoidance. The truth is, as the saying goes, hurt people, regardless of race. If we don't deal with our collective pain, we will continue passing it on. That's why I believe segregated spaces alone will not heal us. You cannot fix broken mindsets with physical separation. Healing requires education, exposure, and empathy. So yes, I feel we should integrate, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and socially. Integration, when done with intention and care, allows us to move towards something bigger than survival. If we don't actively work to unlearn hate, envy, and insecurity, we will continue to hurt each other regardless of our race. Segregation doesn't solve that. I see segregation as limiting when it comes to the concept of embracing more than just ourselves, or more than just our own kind or our own ways. The future lies in diverse spaces. True diversity allows for greater exposure, understanding, and respect. It gives us all the chance to learn about one another, our differences, and our shared humanity. And that, to me, ultimately is how we evolve.